welcome to the podcast. I'm Celine, a media graduate with interesting course.
And I'm a dad. I'm Stephen. I'm an organisational psychologist. I was raised in a cult. And it's a very special day today, Celine, isn't it? Happy birthday to us.
Unfair. Well, the podcast is having a proper birthday party before I had a birthday party. It was 4, wasn't I, when we went and did our first birthday celebration? So in fact, proper. I'm jealous of the podcast. Yeah, I think it's unfair.
Well, yeah. So this is for our not regular listeners. This is because I was, me and your mum, we were raised as Jehovah's Witnesses. We sort of left Jehovah's Witnesses when you were around, when you were born, but it took us a couple of years really to get into the swing of life outside of the JWs, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't straight away. I think we've said before how Christmas tree started about like 2 feet and now it's 7.
Exactly. Yeah.
And, all of that. So yeah,
it's part of the process, isn't it? Yeah. So 3 years since we started the podcast. We started as "What should I think about?" ...
I was in my early 20s. No, I'm in my late 20s.
That is quite scary, isn't it? Really, when you think about that.
Yeah, and I dislike it. I was quite comfortable with 26, 27. I don't know. I'm sorry to be that person that's really annoying, and like people younger than you complain.
Yeah.
But the 30s are approaching. It's nervous.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Anyway, so it's not about you, it's about the podcast. It's Cult Hacker's birthday. So although it started off with a different name, we are saying it's the 3rd birthday, 3 years of cult hacking. And I'm pretty proud of that. I think we've had some really interesting conversations. I mean, I was looking up at all the people we've spoken to. There's like about 95 different guests we've had over the 3 years, which is pretty amazing, really.
I'd say
some really interesting people.
Impressively consistent, I would say. Because we do not miss an episode. We mathers get things done.
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of podcasts have seasons, don't they? And we're still in season 1, 3 years later. It's not always been easy, but we've managed to do it. So today we're going to have a bit of a party, Celine. So you might be able to hear in the background that the party's getting started. So we're going to slip into the space-time continuum party there. And we're going to revisit some of our guests. So our guests are in this party. And we're going to go and have a quick word with our guests, and we'll just sort of step back into our conversations that we had with them. So some of these go back to our first year, some second year, and so on. So we hope you enjoy this episode. It's a bit of a special one.
Oh, okay. Should we go speak to Lizzie Ens, former Amish person?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, Lizzie was such a popular guest.
I was so curious about the world outside of what I was living in that I did recognize it within myself that we were different.
Yeah.
And it made me feel insecure and uncomfortable in certain situations. So like if you went to the grocery store and you had to get stuff, or if someone, like, people will give you weird looks if they don't understand.
I was going to say, how do people treat you as well? That's another question. Yeah.
In general, the people around there, they're familiar with Amish. So they're, in general, like, people are really, really nice. But depending on where you went, if they weren't familiar with them, like, you definitely would get weird looks. Like, who are these people and where do they come from? But I think that you're also so secluded that you 100% don't know what you don't know. So I feel like a lot of my insecurities that I had to work through didn't happen until after I left, because then I got exposed to, this is the real world. Like this, there's all these things that I have no clue about. And then, shame and guilt and fear come in because you're just like, I don't know anything. So Yeah. I never really thought about that before, though, as far as like what I felt within that specific question. I was never asked that before, so that was a good question.
I suppose like that kind of leads me into what I was thinking about in terms of leaving. Like, I suppose, was there a moment building up to you deciding to leave, or were you all of a sudden like, oh, it just hit you that you wanted to leave? Yeah, what was that process like for you, just internally?
It's a long process. Mm-hmm. Nobody just wakes up one day and says, I'm leaving. Mm-hmm. Because where we are, we can't just tell our family, hey, we're leaving, mm-hmm. right? Like we have to, like, behind the scenes, plan it, figure it out. And then on top of that, you don't have a lot of connections, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's like, okay, I want to leave, but how in the world am I going to make this happen? Mm-hmm. Right? So I think that I started getting that feeling of I need to leave at some point, at least find out what I don't know, at around 13. Mm-hmm. I felt this like kind of like fire inside of me. Like there's something more and I'm driven to find out more.
Hey, look over there. There's Brent Lee. Brent's been on the podcast twice, so let's go and have a chat to Brent. He was a former conspiracist, so he's a very, very interesting guy to talk to. Hey, Brent.
People didn't generally think that these were hoaxes back then. Okay. In the 2000s, like that wasn't really a narrative in the conspiracy community, which today it is. Almost anything happens, people act like it's a hoax, it's a crisis. Crisis actors are involved, and nothing really happened. Mm-hmm. But I didn't think that, and that's what really, it's what really angered me and really drove a lot of my conspiracies. Is that I thought the government was hurting our own civilians. Right. They were killing us and blaming someone else. So that's why I was trying to, bring light to a criminal investigation, essentially, that we should be doing on our government. Yeah. But long story short, like I used to push that a lot, and I put out a little tweet saying that, admitting my sort of owning my role.
I saw that tweet.
And a survivor of 7/7, Paul, he actually contacted me and said like he forgives me for everything I did, and he's really proud of like what I'm doing today. It was really great, and basically Mariana Spring saw this interaction, and so she got in touch with both of us and said, could I interview you both, and would you both like to meet, like either in person or we can do a Zoom call or something. Turns out Paul lives in a different country, so we did it over Zoom, and that became like one of the episodes to this Disaster Trolls, just to give extra context of, it's not all bad. Like we're not all terrible people, and that we can actually change, and something can be resolved from this. And I think that's what she was trying to show the conspiracists, and trying to show Richard D. Hall himself that, this could be fixed. Yeah. So I was able to, be a part of that.
That episode, I remember listening to that because I do remember the tweets that you put out. Actually, I remember the original tweet. I saw it and I saw the reply, and that was quite affecting. But when I listened to the documentary and I heard because we actually get to hear you two talking on that call, and it's actually I think a lot of people reacted in the same way. There's a lump in your throat, and. It kind of, even now talking about it, I think it's such an emotional piece actually, and that ability for somebody like you to be able to say, look, I want to say sorry, and I want to own what happened. I think is really, as I say, affecting. It's really heartwarming.
Right, okay, there's Daniella over there, Daniella Mestyanek Young. She's a US Army vet, and she was raising the children of God. She's written a book as well, so we talked to her about her experiences. Let's go and have a chat.
was just going to come off the back of what you're saying there about the fact that you know, had taken in, without realising the fear of the people on the outside and what that would be like. But you obviously did want to go and be outside. So I guess, like, it's a very big question, so answer it as broadly or specifically as you like. But how was that kind of process mentally, going from I'm afraid but I want to?
Yeah, you know, one of the things with, you know, having the term systemites, right, which is a term for outsiders, which is a lot of times called us versus them thinking, but it's also dehumanization, right? Like, we, the 10,000 members of the Children of God, we were the family, we were God's army, we were right. And everyone else, like, nothing was even considered, right? So there's absolutely no consideration for another way of being. It's just, we're right and they're wrong. And, you know, when I was 6 years old, after some fairly horrific experiences, I remember having this conversation with myself and saying, you know, if this is correct, if the family is really God's chosen people, like, I don't want God. I'm, you know, hell's going to suck, but I'm out of here. And I so much relate to what you were saying about, you know, just wanting to prove everybody wrong. But Celine, to answer your question, the way I describe it in Uncultured is I was as afraid that I would have to go as I was that I would have to stay.
Oh, look, there's one of your old professors over there, Celine. There's Professor Chris French, used to be a professor at Goldsmiths University. He described himself as professor of weird shit, didn't he?
That is his self-proclamation, yeah. Me and a friend definitely did this to ourselves. I remember, like, we started playing something that we made up as kids. We called it the coin game, where we just flipped a coin and it was either heads or tails, and it was like, oh, we're talking to ghosts, and they either say yes or no.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and we were like definitely feeding that into each other. Other kids would see us doing this on the playground and join in, and then they'd say, oh, I definitely saw something over there, or like something, or it's definitely colder now, or whatever. And it started, you know, feeding in. And I think I believed it less in the moment, and then more after the fact, when we were sat in class later and you're not allowed to talk to each other. You're meant to be working, but you're just sitting there thinking about it. You know, and you go back on lunch and you're like, it was definitely, you know, we've got ourselves into trouble here, guys. It's really bad. You know, and I remember, you know, I definitely know none of it's real now, but I remember thinking we were seeing things and it feeling very real.
Well, I mean, again, this is the power of suggestion. This is another kind of relevant thing to anomalistic psychology in general. I mean, one of the nice things about anomalistic psychology is that you can actually try and kind of test these things under properly controlled conditions so that you know exactly what is going on and how people's perception of what's going on is deviating from that. But I mean, that's a really nice example of what you just said there. I mean, in fact, you know, one of the kind of biases that we have, if that's the right word for it, is that human beings are really good at kind of making sense of the world around us, picking up on meaningful patterns, but sometimes we read meaning in when it isn't really there. And there was, in fact, a study that was done of essentially what you were saying. The participants in the study were told that they could have a session, kind of an online session. This was years and years back, you know. Have an online session with a counsellor, but the counsellor could only answer in terms of yes or no. So, you know, they all had to be yes/no questions that were put to the counsellor. And in actual fact, the responses were just entirely random. But people would often find it really insightful, you know, the kind of responses they were getting from this counsellor, as they thought. And it's exactly what you're saying there. You know, if you think you're communicating with something outside and in fact it's just random, you're the one who's reading the meaning into it, but it can still feel very real. And then the additional thing of actually seeing things that probably were not really happening. Again, we did a study of that. And again, this brings us back to the memory thing again. One of the phenomena that we're interested in, and this is something that my colleague at Goldsmiths, Fiona Gabbert, who I know you know, she did research on something called memory conformity. That's where you have a situation, if you only have a single eyewitness account, you would not give that as much evidential weight as if you've got multiple witnesses and they're all saying more or less the same thing. And that's probably quite sensible. One thing to bear in mind is that if people witness something unusual, whether it be a crime or a possible sighting of the Loch Ness Monster or a ghost or a UFO, they will discuss it with each other. And one person's account can influence another person's memory.
Let's go over there to Susan Dones from the NXIVM group. That was a very interesting interview.
It was, yeah. She was one of the first to sort of flag that as a dangerous group, wasn't she?
Mm-hmm. She's got to have a movie one day, 100%.
Definitely.
So here's a quote, Susan. She's an amazing woman, and she totally understands how it all works. So that's what Mark Vicente says in the vow, and he's particularly talking about how you took on NXIVM. They actually came after you, didn't they? And do you want to tell us a bit about that? I think this is a really heroic story. So tell us how you ended up in court.
Yeah.
And what you did.
Yeah. Well, they sued me, which I think they were just trying to shut me up for one thing, but they came into my bankruptcy case as adversaries. But instead of just saying, the student list has value and you have to correct that, they filed almost, I think it was like 200. By the time we did discovery, and then they filed secondary claims against me, it was almost 300 claims. Like they said, I tried to extort money out of them, and that I falsified my bankruptcy, and that, this woman left me money who was an ex-NXIVM member in her will, which she didn't, and all kinds of stuff.
Wow. So let me just interrupt. Yeah. Sorry, just to help our listeners. So in a bankruptcy in the States, you have to go to the court to essentially say, I have no money, I can't pay my debtors, and that was mainly because of what happened at NXIVM, of course, which we can get to. But you end up in this terrible situation through your working with NXIVM. But then they decide to hop on to the court case, which is essentially your bankruptcy, as a hostile witness, essentially against you. Claiming money from your estates, which you haven't got because you're going bankrupt.
Yeah, what they want to do is get my bankruptcy tossed so that I would owe all my debtors.
Wow.
And so the thing is that all that debt was NXIVM debt. So money that I had borrowed to start the center, those kinds of things, to take courses, those kinds of stuff. I didn't live an extravagant lifestyle, believe me. So I had a house that was way underwater because of the market crash that had happened in the United States. And I had 2 very used cars. And so, I didn't have an extravagant lifestyle. And so I was broke, my job was NXIVM, I didn't even have a job. So I couldn't find an attorney that would take me on pro bono, which means for free. And any attorney that I called wanted a $20,000 retainer, which I didn't have. And knowing NXIVM, how litigious they were in lawsuits, they would have blown through that in a week if I would have even had that. So here I am in bankruptcy court standing, my bankruptcy was approved. And then you have like 90 days for any of your debtors to come in and say, wait a minute, we want to question this. Right. And so NXIVM came in and said, on the final day and the final hour of my bankruptcy being approved, came in and said, we want to be adversaries. But that was their mode of operation. Anybody else who had ever filed for bankruptcy, NXIVM came in and became adversaries. That was their favorite place to sue people.
All right, so there's a fellow ex-Jehovah's Witness over there. There's Daniel Alan Cox, the author of I Felt the End Before It Came. Fantastic guest, and we did a 2-parter with Daniel, so let's catch up with him.
Yeah, very eloquent.
the short story is that I was out bowling with a few witness friends on the weekend. One of our wholesome activities, and is probably chaperoned. There was probably a few dating situations happening. Of course, everyone being witnesses, and I guess I was feeling good. I was feeling relaxed, and I happened to comment on my friend's boyfriend being handsome, and the comment was left sort of unaddressed, and I was 18 years old at the time, and I'd been living a queer life for at that point a few years, and had started having sex with men already at that point, and I guess I had either let my guard down or was ready to be caught, or a combination of the two, as is always the case. I mean, I'm sure this is a very familiar story to you. And then I got a phone call 2 days later from our congregation's presiding elder. And we basically had our discussion on the phone, which I'm told by several ex-Jehovah's Witnesses is unusual, that I wasn't convened to kind of like an in-person judicial meeting, which I agree is a bit like unusual now that I think about it. But it only goes to show that while our experiences are very common, every Kingdom Hall is informed by the charismatic personality of its, it's like top elder, right? So he did things on the phone, right? And I was offered a choice. Well, actually, first I was asked, do you plan to live as a homosexual? And a very interesting concept here of you can be something but not live as something, which of course is a line straight from the gay conversion therapy playbook, right? And of course that always leads to excellent results in people's lives.
Yeah, I
as
think
we all know,
generally get on okay with that, don't they?
So I told them I had every intention of continuing to sleep with men, and at this point I'd kind of pressed the button on things, and I guess I was looking for like a reason to press that button, and offered a choice to either disassociate myself via letter, or to go through the process of being disfellowshipped with a view to one day repenting, which I think both of us realized on the phone in this pretty unbelievable conversation where he told me that he loved me and to be careful of AIDS. I said, yeah, I'll send you the letter. So I mailed the letter. It was pretty much probably the best thing I've written, although I can't really recall much of it. In my mind, it's this key piece in my literary history.
Let's go speak to Rachael Rain. She's really interesting. She's always got lots to say, lots of really important, interesting stuff to say.
Yeah, Rachael was great. She was from, or she was a member of the Universal Church of the Kingdom of God. She's still very, very active, trying to raise awareness of that group. So let's catch up with her.
Well, the horrific thing was that's where it started. I mean, that's literally, at this point, there was no kind of doubt in my mind about the church. It was the years that followed. So when I was an assistant at 15, by the time I was 19, I got married in the church. I got married to a fellow assistant at the time. And that is just ridiculously young. I mean, in the church, in UCKG years, I was, a fully grown adult because I had to grow up for so young, because when I was 15, I was already an assistant. So by the time I was 19, like in UCKG years, I was already like a full grown woman ready for a husband. So they are really big on young people getting married. I think one of the two reasons, one reason is because they feel that it's a good testimony to others for there to be lots of young married couples in the church. And secondly, they say, look, you need to get married or you're going to fall into sin and go to hell. So you have 3 months. Date someone for 3 months. And if you're not ready to even marry them, you be ready to either marry them or break up with them. Like 3 months is your max, because if you date longer than 3 months, then you're going to fall into temptation, you're going to fall into sin and go to hell.
And we've got another ex-Jehovah's Witness over there, Clare, Alison Hams. She's a therapist. And again, this was one of the most popular episodes. So let's go and chat to Clare.
What are some of the problems that people have when they leave? I mean, obviously, we can make assumptions that we know this because we are ourselves, we've been through that. But I guess everybody's journey is different. So what are some of the difficulties that people have when they leave?
Such diversity. Like you said, we are all individuals. And one of the biggest ones is fear of loss of community. So whether that be family or the community of the cult, which is like a family, which was the case for me. I'd lost family members that had died, so the community for me became very much my family, particularly because when you're born in, you grow up with these people, you've known them, they hold all of your memories and all of your key life events. So that's the big thing, ostracism and shunning. And I think you've interviewed Dr. Heather Ransom, who has written her PhD research around the powerful effects of ostracism and shunning, and just how it can be physically painful. So often people, very feeling very low in their mental health, their emotional state, confused perhaps, and also feeling maybe some sense of, I'm going to say, guilt and shame around having been part of this organisation that's caused great harm. So I've had conversations with former elders that have reached out and said, I'm really sitting with a feeling of shame that I didn't do more to speak out or to effect change. At the same time, knowing that they really couldn't do that. They couldn't really effect change in such a powerful cultic dynamic. But a lot of that difficult emotion that has to be worked through. And then there's other complexities around, again, connections with whether it's children, different family members, grandparents not being able to see their grandchildren, vice versa. Often very relational pieces that people are struggling with.
Let's go speak to JT and Lady C. I was just saying to Dad, they're from quite a while ago when we spoke to them last time. I've lived in 2 different houses since then.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing, isn't it? Yeah, well, that was great fun, and it's nice to go back to earlier days. So yeah, let's chat to JT and Lady C.
And we encourage people. We've always kind of encouraged people. When you leave this organization, if there's nothing else that you do, go to your community college, go to some college, and now, of course, we have good online programs. Yeah. But take at least 1 semester of psychology. That was the class that was when we started going back to, we got ready to go to college. That was the first class we wanted to take. The point that you made is so powerful, because one of the things that we learn in psychology class, and we really spend a lot of time with our professors, is that as humans, we develop a defense mechanism. And I remember the defense mechanism that I was taught and almost all Jehovah's Witness kids were taught. I would come home at the end of the day and you would be crying, and my mom would tell me, don't you worry about it, baby. Jehovah gonna take care of those kids. And so you then begin to look at your classmates when they would say something or laugh. You be saying, "That's all right. Jehovah got something for you." And so, and so you, that was your defense mechanism. You knew that all your classmates were gonna die.
Yeah.
And to think to now look back there as as adults and former witnesses, to think back now to what you just said. What was the psychological effect of a child in the 3rd grade looking at their classmates and seeing dead man walking? I mean, it's unreal.
I mean, we've said about it before. I don't know if you know what I'm going to say, Dad, but when Mum was like a tiny kid and she was told, her teachers took her mum aside and was like, "Can you tell Sarah to stop saying that Jehovah's going to stamp on you like ants, please?"
Oh, wow.
All right, I must go and speak to Dr. Heather Ransom. So she's another ex-Jehovah's Witness, and she got her PhD. She did her research into leavers of Jehovah's Witnesses and the effect of shunning. So she's very, very interesting. Let's go and catch up with Heather.
Two things. So first of all, I mean, I've heard this idea of your cult personality almost being like an overlay over your own personality, and I don't think I agree with that very much. I won't say completely disagree with it, but it wasn't that clear with my undergraduate stuff, but certainly with my postgraduate stuff and stuff that I'm hoping to get published within the next few months. One of my chapters was on identity. I did find that people who've been raised in the religion, they didn't have an identity. You know, they would say things like, "Who was I? I didn't know who I was. I didn't have an identity. Outside of the Jehovah's Witnesses, I didn't have an identity." And I think what it is rather than it being an overlay, I think when you're brought up in it, your identity is so interwoven with the religion that the two are inseparable. And this is why I did a separate, this again for my PhD, why I did a separate chapter on social identity and personal identity, because although they are interwoven, I think they very much are separate as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that being raised a Jehovah's Witness, you have a Jehovah's Witness identity, and outside of that, very little remains because of the fact that it's almost like the soil that you grew up in.
Yeah, and that's.
And I do think it's dangerous.
That is a problem,
I agree with you.
Yeah,
I do agree with you. It's very dangerous, and that's why people go on a quest.
Yeah.
To find out who they are. They may try loads of different religions. They may become a little bit engage in risky behaviour because they don't know what to do with themselves. There's all sorts of things, and I suppose I was quite lucky there. Because I left of my own accord and sought an identity through higher education, I suppose.
Yeah. One of the earliest guests we had was Alex Miller. Do you remember Alex? That brilliant artist. No, not that Alex Miller. Another Alex Miller. So we started our guests when we had Riley first. We're going to have to catch up with Riley and Marsha at some point. But we had Alex Miller, and then we had Alex Miller, which was kind of weird. It was almost like we were trying to speak to all the Alex Millers who used to be Jehovah's Witnesses. But no, I was thinking of the artist that he draws. He paints those beautiful pictures of working men in their flat caps and stuff. So let's go and quickly chat to him. And then we'll go and have a word with Ali Miller, who's the one you're thinking of, the writer, the author. Yeah.
And so despite all the weirdness around myself and the family, I was brought up as a Jehovah's Witness, which was weird to the extreme. You know, it put weirdness on another level.
So what was weird about it then? What was...
Oh, well, you know what it's like. You know, you go to school and you have to leave assembly. And at that time, I went to the Springside Primary School. It was a little village, tiny little village in between the towns of Kilmarnock and Irvine. in the west of Scotland, just about 25 miles south of Glasgow. You think Glasgow's rough? Kilmarnock, my goodness. So Springside Primary was fine. It was more like a little house with 2 classrooms in it. Then you went to Dreghorn, which was the next village along. Dreghorn Primary, a large sandstone building, like dark red sandstone building. But there was probably maybe about 600 to 800 pupils in the school. And then when assembly came, you were part of the assembly until prayer time.
Right.
And then you had to stand up and walk past hundreds of kids and all looking at you, as if you had 2 heads. And then after the prayer was finished, you can walk back and in, and everybody's there. And then, no birthdays, no Halloween, no Christmas. I used to hate Christmas, watching all the Christmas presents cycle past your door, your front window, and you know what it was like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. It takes a very long time because you're trying to undo a life, essentially. I don't know if you'd always been a witness or what it was like for you. But yeah, it took me ages. So I had been quite devout. I'd been quite strong. Well, I thought I was quite strong witness, and I had done, looking back, I'd done a lot that I shouldn't have done, but I'd done a lot right as well. And my first child was born in 2005 when I was 25. And I remember distinctly, and it's in the book, most of what I'm going to say is in the book probably. But yeah, so I remember distinctly I was given, she was a few days old, and someone gave her a copy of my book of Bible stories. And they were so excited. I remember that. Yeah, they were so excited to give me this book, which had given me nightmares when I was a child. And for people who don't know the witnesses who are listening, my book of Bible stories is a book that you are to read to your children, and it's got exceptionally graphic illustrations in it. I don't know if they've revised it, because the witnesses do tend to revise their publications and make sure that their older publications are taken off the internet. But one of the pictures in particular, I think it might be about the 5th story in, was the picture of Noah's flood. And the flood waters are rising, and people are trying to grab hold of floating logs, and people are drowning, and there's children in the picture, and it's graphic and it's horrific. And I remember as a child dreaming this image and being really affected by it. And here I was, young, brand new mother with this tiny baby in my arms. I'd been given this book, and I thought, what's wrong with me? I thought there was something wrong with me. I didn't doubt the faith. I doubted myself. I doubted my ability to bring a child up in this religion. And I didn't know why. I didn't know what was wrong. And I did think for about the next 2 years after that there was something wrong with me.
Oh, look, there's Casey from the Cult Vault. We've got to say a quick hello to Casey.
Also thinking about how we educate the wider world. If we're placed into silos in some ways, I know that even some people have expressed kind of being wary of the terminology of first generation, multi-generation survivors, MGAs and FGAs, because there's a fear of being placed into those silos or boxes again, and having people label you in a way that you might not want to be labeled. It does make it easier when communicating with people to say, this is I am, because it gives a lot of context to a person's experience. But in order to bridge that gap between the wider world and those that have experienced life in a cult, or people that are educating themselves and others who are working in the field of cult education and cult awareness, we can't bridge that gap if the entire demographic of people in that field is made up of the same demographic. So
absolutely, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I liken it to so, you know, eating ice cream, let's say, if you've never eaten ice cream, you can't really understand what the sensation of eating ice cream is like. You know, you can't know the qualitative experience of eating ice cream. And that is absolutely true. You know, in order to know what eating ice cream is really like from a sort of qualitative perspective, you have to have eaten it yourself. However, that's not the only thing you can say about it. You know, so you can analyze what ice cream is made up of. You know, what are the ingredients of ice cream? How does it get made? What are the differences between good and bad ice cream in terms of what people say? You know, what are people's stories about the first time they ate ice cream and the different experiences they have? So, you know, yes, it's true that there is a unique perspective that individuals have when they've experienced life in a cult. But that doesn't mean the conversation stops there and there's nothing anybody else can say about it. So we definitely need all of those aspects as well.
The language is important because, like you say, it helps and it's quick for understanding. And like you say, you didn't necessarily know that, you know, some years ago that born-ins was a thing. So obviously having that language makes it a lot easier to have those conversations because it's it's quite descriptive, it's quite clear, you can understand and start a conversation from there. It's just the concern of just doing exactly what was happening if you were in the groups anyway, of separating and
absolutely and you're also at risk of pushing out other people who might want to learn but don't understand that terminology and would have to do quite a bit of legwork to get to a place where they recognized certain terminologies. You know, I see, you know, terms like DAVO being thrown around a lot at the moment, and it's a really helpful acronym, but you would have to actively go out to understand what the words were in that acronym. And especially then how that applies to these specific situations, because DAVO can be used to look at narcissism and narcissistic abuse. It can be used to look at, you know, intimate relationships and domestic violence and domestic abuse. So it's you are right, Celine. It's easy to have these acronyms and to have these descriptive terms, but again, could be a way that people find this field inaccessible. So like you said, Stephen, I think the best way to go is to make sure that everybody is being safe, everybody is being sensitive, everybody is listening to each other and actively trying to educate and learn, but everybody should also be able to do that.
Oh, look, we've got Dr. Stain over there. We've got to speak to her. She's always in all of the documentaries.
Alex, yeah, got to go and talk to her. It's great to speak to her. We've spoken to her twice, actually, so that was really nice.
But yeah, quite busy with the charity. I recently, during the last few years, wrote a chapter for a book that's coming out on, it's a 7-volume series from Oxford University Press on extreme beliefs and behavior. And I was asked to do a chapter kind of trying to link and talk about the overlaps of a bunch of related concepts: extremism, cults, violent extremism, conspiracism, apocalypticism.
Wow.
It was quite challenging, but
sounds really interesting. Can't wait to read that.
I don't write much for academic things, but this seemed an important one to, and I was, you know, I'm always honored when people ask me to do things like that. When did I do the January 6th committee? I don't know if I talked about that.
I've not heard about that at all.
That was actually a career peak in my own estimation. So the US Senate Select Committee on the January 6th insurrection, the invasion of the Capitol that Trump is up on charges for, and along with a lot of other people. So there was this very good committee that did really good work. One of the sort of subcommittees they invited me to write a submission. It's kind of like a bit like a witness statement, talking about how Trump and Trumpism and the various other bits of that insurrection had cultic elements. So that if anyone's interested, that's both on my website, and I think you can. There's an archive of all the things that were submitted. So that was really interesting, and what I focused on was Trump as a cult leader, classic cult leader, the Proud Boys as something that looked very much like a cult, and very interestingly, the Rod of Iron Ministries, which the Rod of Iron is a spin-off from the Moonies run by the son of Reverend Moon.
Right.
And they were there with weapons. And there were many other groups there, but I focused on those three elements and just went through kind of the cult definition I used and said, this is where they fit. So that was interesting.
Right. Okay. So there's two people there that are talking together that we really should go and speak to. There's Daniel Stricker and there's Erica Bourneman, and they were both members of Quasi-Zabantu. Mm-hmm. So they've been doing a lot of work over the last couple of years. So let's go and chat to them, catch up with what they were doing at the time. Well, can you tell us a bit about what confession is like in Quasi-Zabantu?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, you're spot on. So, I mean, interestingly, I don't think that the confessional system was in any way derived from the Catholic or Orthodox traditions, because the founder of the group, I'm trying to remember what his background was as a family. I think it may have been Methodist or something like that. So, yeah, it was really something. They created belief systems that they said came out of the revival, but what that meant was that somebody had a dream or somebody had a vision. Somebody felt this was the best way to do things. And one of the core tenets, which remains until this day, is this idea of confession. So essentially what they teach is they kind of bypass the Protestant understanding of justification by faith, where it's faith in Christ and the atonement that saves. They've developed this belief system where the way you make it to heaven is you confess all of your sins, but not directly to God. It has to be in the presence of one of the leaders or one of the co-workers there. And generally what that would look like is that meant going back through your entire life and trying to confess all of your sins. And then in an ongoing sense, anytime you sinned, you had to confess again. Now, the really insidious thing about this doctrine from a psychological perspective is that they essentially taught that every time you sinned, until you've confessed it, you're back under the judgment of God. So particularly for children, there's this constant sense of not only divine omniscience, but this vindictive figure that is all-knowing, all-seeing. And of course, you can never really keep up to date in terms of, keeping your life pure enough, as it were. And so, for example, one thing that they did at the school at Quasi-Zabantu is that they made confession of sin mandatory for the school students for at least some of the time that the school existed. So, yeah, there's a sense in which that became the sum of Christianity for them. So to be a good Christian at Quasi-Zabantu was equal to, confessing your sins regularly to one of the leaders.
It is. It's kind of like you're super and hyper vigilant all the time.
Yeah.
Because I lived my life, most of my life, I lived in fear. And fear is often still my first response to a new situation, but less and less so with therapy, with just living, just being. And on the day before my 50th birthday, August last year, I had gone, we were starting to be allowed to travel a little bit, but so with two good girlfriends, we went up the West Coast to this secluded place, which was just so beautiful. I lay in bed and I watched the sunrise, and I realized that for the first time in my life, I like myself. I like who I am. And it was so breathtakingly amazing. I just cried, and for days afterwards, when I would tell a friend or someone about it, I would cry. It was so profound that at the age of 50, I suddenly understand what people say, that you have to like yourself. I get it now. You have to, and then you kind of become a little bit more unshakable. But it took me 3 decades to get to that point. Yeah. And writing a book.
Oh, we've got Kendra as well, really interesting person that we spoke to recently. So let's go catch
Kendra.
You mentioned fear, and there's something that I think that lots of us who were raised in these groups experienced a lot, and it becomes a kind of chronic condition in some respects. I wonder whether you're able to, as much as you want to, obviously, talk a little bit about how fear was kind of a normal part of your life and what you were afraid of, and what that was like.
Gosh, that's a great question, because it's such an important part of, I think, religious cults in general, but just speaking from my own experience with the fundamentalist group, everything is fear-based. It's, we're always being protected. And we were always told, like, if we went to public school, that's the reason we weren't allowed to go to public school, is because we would be persecuted for Christ. We were the reason there were school shootings, is because people wanted to kill Christians. And so if we were in public school, then, undoubtedly, then we would be put in that situation where we would have to choose between God or living. So that was one of the examples. But also just the constant fear around disappointing God, about the fear about accidentally, seducing men just by existing, and that, that would result in a rape or a pregnancy, or like, the fear of constantly the rapture with Christ coming back in the lake of fire. Like everything is so fear-based. And so obviously fear is used as a tactic to get people to do what you want them to do.
Oh, I also want to go and talk to Nicola Ransom. So Nicola was a member of the Rajneeshpuram. So most people will know this group through the Netflix film called Wild Wild Country. Let's go and chat to Nicola.
Well, I'm currently in San Diego, California, so it's really exciting to be talking to you in the UK, because I'm originally from the UK. I came from Rugby and emigrated to Canada when I was 10, and ended up living in Canada and then back in England. And then I was in England after university that I got involved with Rajneesh and the organization, which was then centered in India. So I went out to India in 1979 for a few months, and then returned to actually Canada, trying to make money to get back to live there in India, when Rajneesh moved the ashram from India to eventually Oregon. And it became known as Rajneeshpuram, and that's what the Netflix documentary Wild Wild Country centers on. So I was there most of the time, and I was there through the bitter end, and then have been in the process of trying to figure out what happened and extricating myself ever since, basically. So I think one of the steps towards things getting darker is this very tricky thing of thinking you're above the law. And I had absolutely no idea that there were really egregious things going on. And most of us who were the peons, who were building the city and working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, had no idea that the administration was doing things like what it ended up, we found out had happened, poisoning the water supply, poisoning salad bars in a local town where an election was going to be held. And actually making, I think it was about 750 people ill with salmonella who ended up in hospital. That's just one thing that happened, but it was the biggest bioterrorist attack on US soil, and not the first, because Native Americans were poisoned also.
Of course.
But it was really egregious. And so that was an enormous shock to just about everyone except for the elite who had been involved in that.
Do you remember when you found out that had happened? Were you still in at that point, or?
Yes, I was there on the ranch when Sheila and her group of sort of the top administrators had left on a plane. I think it was night or dawn or something. So that in itself was the first indication of what's happened. This was unthinkable. And so gossip and fear and was going on and on. And there were thousands of us there. And then Rajneesh called a meeting, and actually he was the one who told us. He was speaking now, and he said, Sheila has been doing all these crimes. She turned my commune into a fascist state. And, there were plots to kill the attorney general. There were all kinds of terrible things that were unfolding. But he put it all on her and her top group. But figuring out, what was actually true was sort of a very difficult process that I can't say I completely have, because there's only a few people who really know what was actually true.
Okay, and before we go, we've just got to catch up with Riley and Marsha, so let's go and quickly catch up with them.
I woke up again, and then I woke up Marsha, and I said, there's something I need to talk to you about. And I remember her getting really nervous. And I said, I started to tell her about Armageddon and how Jehovah's Witnesses interpret Armageddon. And the big thing for me was to let Marsha know that Jehovah's Witnesses believed, and since I was still mentally in, I still believed that when Armageddon comes, only Jehovah's Witnesses are going to survive.
Yeah,
that was me. That was my way of telling her, you haven't got long, because this COVID thing, this is all Bible prophecy coming true. But at the same time, I wanted her to know that I've chosen her, even if it means that I die with her.
Yeah.
So I said, I think the way I started, yes, I remember now, the way I started the conversation, I said to her, do you know that I love you? And she said, yes, of course. I said, do you know how much I love you? And she said, of course I do. And I said, no, you don't. Yeah. I said, the reason why I'm saying that is because basically right now, I've made a decision, literally within the past 48 hours. I've made the decision to die with you rather than to save my own life. Yeah. So that's how I let her know about, the whole Armageddon thing. But at the same time, I didn't want the conversation to be, this is like me just imparting information about Jehovah's Witnesses beliefs. I wanted her to truly understand how much I love her, because I'm fully convinced that neither of us have long. But instead of going back and saving myself, I would rather die being with you.
Great. Well, I've really enjoyed chatting to all those people. It's been a great party so far. So I don't know about you, but I just want to keep doing this thing. I want to keep talking to so many really interesting people, Celine. Also, we have, haven't we? And we also have our topics, which I really like talking about. I mean, we tend not to highlight those so much, but I have some of my favourites. I don't know whether you have yours, but my favourite was, is there a UFO cult inside the Pentagon? That was my
I think you had a very fun time, didn't you? Had a gloriously fun time with that one.
It was so brilliant. Wrote a transcript of the hearing, and then we went through it line by line. It was just absolutely brilliant. So if you've not caught that one, listeners, then you've got to catch that one. That was very popular.
Recently, I've got to say, I think our prison experiment one's got to be a top one, just because I described it a little bit to Thomas, and he thought it sounded so interesting, he actually listened to the podcast. So, yeah. So it must have been a good one. Yeah, because he listened to it.
Excellent. Yeah, so that's good. So Thomas the Science Guy, we call him. He's been on the show as well, but it's nice to know that he listens, but only when he's interested in the subject.
Yeah. Well,
Fair
he doesn't
enough.
live with me all the time.
Yeah, I suppose he hears
Maybe
enough
when he's
of you,
away,
really.
when he's learning, when he's meant to be learning physics, and he goes to his little room all alone. When he's away in Abingdon, he can listen to me rattling on.
Very good. Our most popular topic one was our very first episode, which was people in cults. So that was our very first one 3 years ago.
The first episode ever.
Yeah, number one.
I didn't realise we did a cult episode for the first one, you know.
Yeah, it's interesting because we didn't really see it as a sort of
mainstay.
Cult. No, but it was a topic that we thought was quite interesting, and obviously I've always had an interest in it, but we didn't see this podcast as being just solely about cults at the time. But yeah, it was one of the 5 that we did to start with. So we recorded 5 in one go and then released them all together. So we had a bit of a bank so people could binge a little bit. But that is the number one on the list. So yeah, check it out. You'll notice how we've changed over the 3 years. Cool. Right. Well, I've had a good time. I don't know about you listeners, but thank you so much for being our listeners. We really appreciate it. We're not going anywhere, so please don't forget to subscribe and to follow or do whatever you need to do to make sure that you get our podcast dropping in your pod app every Saturday morning. So please subscribe and also reach out to us. It's really great when people do that.
If you want to be one of the party members, then reach out, let us know.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's how we do get quite a lot of our guests. People reach out and say they'd like to maybe tell their story or talk about a book that they're writing or something they're doing. So by all means do that. And yeah, it's great to meet new people. So yeah, feel free to contact us that way. The link is on the show notes, so you can do that. If you want to become a patron, big things are coming on the Patreon front, actually. I haven't really talked to you about this, Celine, but I've been looking at trying to make the patronage a bit more interesting. And so I've introduced some new tiers. They're not in action yet, but there will be things happening in January. So, but now's the time to get in on all of that. And the final thing I wanted to run by you, Celine, and I haven't talked to you about this, but our wonderful patrons, particularly Marianne, she's just never gotten over the fact that we changed the theme tune. And she really likes the old theme tune. And, you know, I must admit, I kind of like the old theme tune. It's a piece that I composed using the help of GarageBand. And I really like the jazzy chords on there. That I just really like it. So yeah, do we go back to the old music or do we stick with the new music? What do we do?
Or you can use it to play out if you like. You can play out with that music, can't you?
Yeah. What at the end of each
episode? The outro.
episode?
Yeah, that could be the outro music. How about that? Compromise
All
for
right,
you
let's
and
do that.
Marion.
Compromise. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's do that. That's been decided. All right. Well, here it is. Here's the Electric Sheep, I called it. And yeah, thank you very much for being a listener, and speak to you again next week. Bye for now.
Bye. I can't even remember how the old intro goes. Yeah.
That one.
Brr.
Do.
And that's the new outro. It's just you doing that.
And as promised, we just want to say thank you to all our 90 odd guests that we've had over the 3 years. I'm going to read them out now. If you're interested in listening to any of these, you can find them on our archive or in our back catalogue. So yeah, catch any of these guests if you want to learn more. And if I have missed anybody out, I really am sorry, but it's quite difficult to go back through them all. So I think I've got them all. So thank you, Rachael Bernstein from the Indoctrination Podcast, Zanane, ex-Christian fundamentalist, Scott Homan, Ryan Sutter, Anthony Mathania, Denise Wise, Micah Allen Losh, all from the Witness Underground documentary project, Stephen Patterson, human rights lawyer, Professor Dennis Turish, Dr. Alexandra Stein, Kendra Bryan, ex-evangelical, Sue Winter, Cult Hopper, Joe Lloyd Johnson, ex-evangelical, Casey from the Cult Vault, Brian and Troy from the Teenage Fundies podcast, Dan Shaw, therapist, Abby, who talked about the troubled teen industry, Susan Dones, ex-NXIVM, Rebecca Woodward, ex-JW, and journalist, Brent Lee, former conspiracist, anchor Richter, journalist and author, Hayward Gatch, anarchist, Daniel Allen Cox, author and ex-Jehovah's Witness, Tamara, ex-member of a Sufi group, Rachel Rain, former member of Universal Church of the Kingdom of God, Todd Brown, ex-Sufi group, Narissa and Lara from the Two Girls One Cult podcast, Frankie Tees, ex-Morningland Church, Thomas, the science guy, Clare Alison Hams, therapist and ex-JW, Elgin Strait, former Mooney, Clint Haycock, former evangelical pastor, Daniella Mestyanek Young, US Army vet and raised in the Children of God, Joy Cranham, former Exclusive Brethren, Darryl Ray, organisational psychologist and founder of Recovering from Religion, Natalie Grand, ex-JW, graphic art novelist, Andrew Pledger, former student at Bob Jones University, James Carrier and Jane Stewart from the World of Work, Jolynn Armstrong, therapist, Hilary Alexandra, ex-Christian scientist, Jennifer French from the Project Hope podcast, Cherie D'Souza, former JW and board member of Recovering from Religion, Nicola Ransom, Rajneeshpuram, Andrew Jasko, psychotherapist, Professor Darren Shalakum, social scientist and researcher, Germ from the Mentally Diseased YouTube channel, Marianne, one of our patrons, an ex-Jehovah's Witness, Ali Miller, author and ex-Jehovah's Witness, Kat Wallace, ex-JW and speaker at the ICSA conference, Alicia, ex-Jehovah's Witness, Kimberly Miller, ex-Jehovah's Witness and author, John Elson, artist, former JW, Dr. Heather Ranson, former JW researcher and now academic, Leon Helsby, ex-Jehovah's Witness, poet, Marsha and Riley. Riley is an ex-Jehovah's Witness, Mary Mahoney, former Children of God, Becky Armstrong Corbett, ex-Jehovah's Witness therapist, Daniel O'Brien, ex-Jehovah's Witness educator, Ashlyn Hilliard was with ICSA and now with People Leave Cults, producer Bob, Daniel Stricker, former member of Quasi-Zabantu, Jake Vaughan, YouTuber and ex-JW, Erica Bourneman, former member of Quasi-Zabantu, Ming Grob, peer researcher into coercive control, Darren Slade, PhD, former pastor and now president of the Centre for Religious Research, Sapphire Phoenix, ex-JW musician, Lizzie Ens, former member of the Amish community, Patrick Ryan, cult mediation specialist, Sarah Mather, former Jehovah's Witness and my wife, Donna Stevenson, former Jehovah's Witness, Gilly Jenkinson, therapist and author, Angela Lathwell, former member of the Children of God, John and Seamus from the Free Thought Prophets podcast, Luke Stevenson, former Jehovah's Witness and singer, JT and Lady C, ex-Jehovah's Witness YouTubers, Jared Scott, former Jehovah's Witness, Jordan Robertson, former Jehovah's Witness, Robin Jackson, South African former Jehovah's Witness, Ryan David Tuttle, former Jehovah's Witness, Mark Jones, former JW and Cora specialist, Jeffrey Wallace, Pimo, former Jehovah's Witness, Camilla Didina, filmmaker, Professor Chris French, Emeritus Professor of Anomalistic Psychology, as he puts it, Professor of Weird Shit, Alex Miller, artist and ex-Jehovah's Witness. Thank you so much for being our guest. It means a lot to us, and we hope to speak to many more new people over the coming years. Bye for now.